So here we are at the third talk in this sequence of 5 talks, which are about the um, ways that I first tried to apply my discoveries about startles and emergences. Um, and as I have said, they were I'm focused mostly on how I could improve, augment, and eventually create a different way of doing therapy, a way of helping people, a way of changing lives. Um, in this um, in this talk, which will really be a sequence of 3 shorter, hopefully brief, talks, I'm going to talk about what came to be called the 12 categories of block markers. So what is a block? Um, well, if you were to look on the website, the original things which do this, um, which refer to this idea of block markers, the the B and the L in the word block were both capitalized, and certainly not a normal thing in English, and that referred to the idea that the word block is a contraction of 2 words, and it's a long story and not for now, but a piece of where I originally began to process and understand what startles did to people. And in a meditation, a long hour and a half long meditation, I saw and was told by someone that these are being locks, places that your existence, you are locked out from your very being. So I originally called it a being lock, and then it got shortened to capital B, capital L, O, C, K, and then it became regular spelling because that's more than enough. Your vision, your ability to picture in a certain area of life, because you were startled in that particular pattern of experience, you can't picture, even when asked to imagine. This is probably the foundation of everything that you'll learn in these 4 years, because this idea that divides all experience into what you can and what you cannot picture, that's the first 2-letter 1 that existed in what I discovered. So now, 12 categories of block markers, meaning 12 groups of experiences, patterns of injury, and each of these block markers is a question, a brief question, that by simply asking the question, you get at an injury. Now, get at it does not mean you've identified the specifics, the 3 to 5 second pattern of experience that triggers the reliving of the startle itself, the blankness that comes afterwards. It's not that. What it is doing by asking these questions is simply putting you in the ballpark. So back then, I used these questions almost every session in one way or another, and I would make note to things that people said that answer the question without me having asked it. But the point of what I am going to do now is to just give you several examples of ways that these things apply. So, the first one. Category 1, it says in the drawing, vivid recall of a painful event. Category 3, hating an ordinary life event. And category 6, the experience of having no choice. These are the 3 things that we're going to, I'm going to give you brief talks about, and I'm going to split them up into each one being that and what kind of a story is related to that. And so, a miracle is occurring as we speak. This is it for the introduction. So, the first category of block markers, vivid recall of a painful event. Immediately, if you're paying attention to the 2 that are 1, this is a defining question or a defining indicator for a kind of injury. So let's start with the word vivid. Vivid generally means colorful, clear, vivid. And vivid recall of a painful event here refers to the mind having an especially seemingly important, weighty ability to picture a small part of a life event. What kind of things can these be? Well, for me, I can vividly recall somewhere around 2006, I never remember the date, but I was going around a cloverleaf to get onto a parkway, 4 lanes, 2 and 2, and the middle was divided with grass and whatever, and in the middle of that was a series of steel posts with loops and then cables through them. Anyway, in a previous talk, you saw the outcome of that my car went under those cables, skidded on black ice, went under the cables, and the cables took off the top of my car, the windshield, the windows, etc., and all was left was basically above the doors, and somehow I wasn't killed. In any event, vivid recall of a painful event. So I can vividly recall getting on to the actual parkway, and there's a car in front of me which is going slowly. And me being me, I'm on my way to work. I believe it's a Friday morning. But I can see myself start to change into the passing lane. Now, I can't see what's there. No matter how I try, I cannot see. I can't be in the car and look out of that thing as I begin to skid. I can't see it. And I have done much work on this, and quite honestly, right now I don't care. I'll never heal all of my injuries. I'll be having injuries for my whole life, and many will never even be visible to me. But this one, vivid recall. So I can vividly recall getting on that parkway and being behind the car and feeling a level of impatience. Now you see I'm laughing? Please note, that laugh involuntarily means that I have had an injury about that type of impatience that I've emerged from. I loved myself in that moment. I'm not saying I love being impatient. I'm saying that I feel love toward myself when I feel impatient. And I got on that morning and I was impatient, and I can recall feeling that. Now, what can I see? Well, I talked about that I could see a strange shadowy being up against the clouds that day. As I was down, my head was down, and I'm looking up, and my head is on the console, and I'm looking up where there was no windshield anymore. And I can see this, but now this is there. It's not vivid. What is vivid is the experience of the quiet. So vivid can be something where perhaps you have your eyes closed, but you can hear a sound as if it's there, right there with you. And I can hear a silence, like the silence after a great snowfall, on a Sunday night. And I can feel what was probably one of the most safe experiences, unafraid, that I've ever felt in my life. Then I can now see just snippets of experience, and then I can picture the cars going by me as I stand in the snow holding my black leather briefcase, and the cars are slowing down, all of them, and some are stopping to ask me if I'm all right. Mulling up a little bit, because this is vivid. I can see this. An earlier accident, when I am in my 20s, which I have vivid recall of, is that I am driving on a 4-lane highway, but no divider this time, and I am in the passing lane, and I'm probably going about 40. There is a car on my right side, a little behind me, and a car starts to cross the road from my left to my right in a place where there's no way to cross the road. It's going from a parking lot to a parking lot, but there's no road, there's no crossing. And it's a station wagon, and it's filled with people, and the driver comes across the road and hits the front left corner of my car, hits the bumper and pushes me into the car that's coming on my right, and then those two cars push me into the parking lot, the both of them. Now, the impact was so great that I remember looking out of my driveway, this is vivid, and looking at the car and wondering how I lived, because both the floor and the roof of the car literally got bent. The entire car, it wasn't just like things got crushed. The floor was bent. I know, because afterwards snatches of this came back to me, that when I first got hit in the front, the car hit me and I went in that direction, and I hit so hard that the metal inside of the door, this is how long ago it wasn't just plastic, got dented. My head cracked the window. Then the other hit happened, and my chest caved the entire steering wheel in. The steering wheel was a custom wood steering wheel, not a metal steel one. Perhaps that saved some of my ribs. Caved it in. My head hit the mirror and took the mirror off of the glass. Okay, all of these things happened, but they're just snippets. So where's the vivid recall? I am on that road, and I can, as I am speaking, see that station wagon. I can see that there are people in all the seats. I can see it, and as it's coming across, I have this very vivid experience. Again, that kind of quiet after a snowfall, and I have no fear whatsoever right now, which is odd, but it is. And there's something inside me that I have this very vivid recall of a thought going through my head, which was, oh shit, this is going to be annoying. What a crazy thought to go through my head. I am about to be perhaps killed, and all my thought is that it's going to be annoying, the aftermath. Okay. Vivid recall of a painful event. Now let's do the other side of this. What if somebody can't picture something at all? And this is probably one of the most meaningful stories from a time of leading a group that I've ever had. So it is in this same era, early 2000s, and I am leading a group where I'm teaching a group of aspiring alcoholism counselors. There are probably about, I don't know, 18 or 20 people in a kind of an oval group. I'm sitting in one of the seats in the oval with the people, and I am there to teach them some things about helping people with alcoholism and drug addiction. And I began, as I began most groups at that point in my life, by saying I was going to ask them to picture. I asked them to close their eyes, and I did. I asked them to picture a time where they saw somebody who was drunk. Now, I took them through this. What are the colors? Where are you standing? And I did it in such a way that it left a lot of room for each person to have their own experience. I had done this many, many times at the rehab that I worked at, and so this was one of my favorite tools to do in a group. And I remember, in particular, a woman who was a little bit to my left, I could tell that she was pretty angry when I came in. Not at me, but just an angry person. And holy cow, when I had them come back, they had that then familiar to me change in their state of mind, because they were, once you are immersed in that picture, if you're vividly recalling anything, as opposed to just thinking words about it, if you're vividly recalling it, you get immersed in that. That's where you are, in the picture. And then when you're asked to open your eyes, you can see that transition. It takes a little bit for the person to move from the scene they're picturing back into the scene of the real world and the here and now moment. And that's what happened with this woman. I remember, and I looked around, and she was so obviously emotionally angry that I asked her, to talk about what she saw. And she was picturing her father, who was an alcoholic, and something about beating her mother, and oh, she is so angry. And she was not angry at me. She was not directing it at me. It's very clear in my mind that she was angry at her dad. Now, think about what this means. An aspiring alcoholism counselor. And I did, and I said to her, how do you think that those feelings are going to affect your ability to help people with alcoholism? I remember her getting annoyed at the question, but then having it hit her. I went around the group and asked what people had pictured, and there was a man to the right end of the oval, early 40s, dark skin, dark hair, very quiet man, probably body first. And I asked him what he pictured, and he said he couldn't picture anything. And he was the only person in this group that couldn't picture something. Some of the people could only picture snatches, or that more were talking about it than seeing it, but they all had something. He had nothing. And in fact, it almost felt like he was ashamed that he couldn't do it. Now, I go, okay, and I make a note of it in my head, and I just figure, well, okay, he can't picture that particular thing, that there's something about seeing somebody with alcoholism that is making him go blank. Maybe he was startled by seeing somebody drunk. Okay, so I have the group do a second visual, what came to be called visual dialogue. I ask them to picture a kind of a scene, but this time I ask them to picture something positive about a parent. And again, I get a lot of useful responses from people, but in his case, when I come to him again, he has nothing. Now, there's something about how he is responding so genuinely. He's making an effort. I can tell this is not just somebody who is like going through the motions and just thinks that this is nonsense and I'm not going to be involved. He was trying his best, and he was coming up empty, and more than that, he looked like a little boy. I could feel it. He looked like a little boy. So I thought for a minute about this, and then I asked him if there was ever a time, what is the last time he could remember, in fact, that he had pictured anything? I remember welling up with him. I immediately felt it. I think the whole group felt it. This was so intense. It took him a moment to find his words, and then he said, "It was the night they took my father away. I never saw him again." You see how this is affecting me now. And this is, oh my, a long time ago, decades, almost 20 years. I'm vividly recalling him, hence the welling up. And in that moment, he, for the first time, since he was 6, and he was then 42, I think, pictured something. He is Haitian, and in some kind of a political thing, they came and took his father away, and he never saw him again. He never knew what happened to him. But as they took him away, at 6 years old, when he was 6, that was the last thing that he ever pictured. I want you to consider how traumatic that event was. It didn't just affect his ability to picture his father or to picture his father leaving or a specific event. It was so powerful until that night in that group. He had not pictured anything for the majority of his life. So, vivid recall of a painful event. Here is the man who couldn't picture anything at all. No kind of picture whatsoever. Couldn't picture a banana when I asked him. And then he suddenly vividly recalls seeing them take his father away that night. So, this is the first question to get at that marks a block, a place that the person's experience of life can't change. It's fixed. It's stuck. The theorist Pierre Genet, more than 100 years ago, I remember smiling when I read that he called these things fixed ideas, which they are, a fixed idea. It's stuck. But it also includes a picture and a blankness and the startle that divides those two things. And here is the first vivid recall of that event that man had done at age 42 from when he was 6. That vivid recall was an emergence. He had been unable to picture anything. My vivid recall of getting on the highway that day and the vivid recall of standing on the side of the road as the car slowed down to see if I was okay at the car accident, those were not emergencies. They're vivid recall because in between there are a number of things which I have never been able to picture. And realize I'm not saying remember. You see, the picture may or may not be a memory that's literal. It also can be my mind is creating a picture because this is what the experience feels like. Maybe it's something I saw in a movie. Maybe it's something that I'm fabricating. Or maybe it's literally what happened. I really don't care which it is, you see, because emergence doesn't heal pictures. Emergence heals patterns which prevent you from picturing. And so this is the first block marker. How would you use it? You would say to somebody, is there something that you can picture like it was yesterday? Quite honestly, when you see that, it's only one of two things. It marks a point where a person is picturing just before they were startled, or it pictures a point where a person has an emergence. And then the two stories that I just talked about, myself and that man, I wish I knew his name. It feels disrespectful to not have his name, but so in the story that I told you about myself, I have vivid recall of things that were not including the startle. There's a blank area I can't see, just snatches. Right. So that's before healing. On the other side of that is this man who couldn't picture. He had an injury that was so profound that he could not picture anything. He knew the things, but he couldn't picture them. And then he had this scene emerge in which they took his father away. So, vivid recall of a painful event. Is there something you can vividly recall from your life, like it was yesterday? If so, it is either marks a place where you've been startled. Well, actually, it always marks that, but it also can mark a place where you had the visual material emerge. Okay, the first block marker. And away I go. So here we are with the second of the three block markers that I'm going to give you some examples of. And keep in mind, this is not meant to find an injury. It's meant to put you in the ballpark so that you and whoever you are looking to help can explore that area or events like that. Often the event that you come up with is one of many different kinds of events that could fit the pattern. It's not even necessarily that one. But there are some things that are very broad categories. So hating an ordinary life event is one of those things. There are so many things that people hate almost universally. Not all people, but many. They're just very common. An overreaction to a loud noise, an overreaction to being in the dark for too long, the fear of falling, but a general sense, not a specific one. Fear of, for instance, when you feel a little dizzy, you'll often react to that. Things like that. In this hopefully brief, haha, I know. In this, the second of these three block markers I'm going to talk about, hating an ordinary life event, I'm going to pick something that is, I often use this as an example to get people to understand what being startled is like. And how do you know that's a startle versus just, oh, I don't like that thing. Okay. So the easiest thing, a very common thing that people hate is getting their picture taken. Now, not so much anymore. You know, I mean, there are people who, I don't want to say the word addiction after I've spoken about it so specifically, but they are very certainly compelled to constantly do selfies and things like that. And I don't know what to say about that. But what I am saying is that there are a group of people who hate having their picture taken, and it's not just one or two people. There are a lot of people like this. Now, what could get you to have that kind of hate? Well, we're talking about block markers, so instead of thinking about what, ask yourself, do you like having your picture taken? Do you like being on a video? Like if you're filmed, the group is filmed, do you avoid watching the group's playback because you don't like to see yourself on a video? It's awkward for you, something like that. This is in that category of hating an ordinary life event, seeing yourself, a representation of yourself, or having the event of having a representation of yourself be made. So I'm going to pick a very specific and easy example of the kind of thing that could be an origin for this. And it's not necessarily this. I'm just saying this is one of the more common ways. So fewer and fewer people every year get married and have big weddings. Once upon a time, and you know I'm older than dirt, so I have been to a lot of weddings. Once upon a time, all people had weddings that were big and they, you know, whatever, at a large hall and so on, and there'd be a reception. And of course, a part of all this ceremony and so on were the wedding pictures, the wedding photographer and so on. And there'd be group photos, the whole of the bride's family, the whole of the groom's family, etc. All of these things. So if you can imagine, just try to imagine that you are in a bridal party, perhaps the best man, perhaps one of the, bridesmaids, whatever, and you are the bridal party is having their picture taken separate from the rest of the people, and the photographer is in the front, and he has his camera on a tripod, and his assistant is holding up one of those old-fashioned flash bulb type of lights. Okay. Now, were you to step out of that group and stand behind the photographer and look at all the faces as people are talking, etc., and then you watch their faces, and especially their eyes or their chests for breathing, their, and so on, when the photographer says cheese. If you watch, the majority of those people will wince or flinch. Why? Well, okay, to see the contrast and compare to get this, now imagine that in that bridal party there's some little boy or little girl, 3 or 4 years old, the ring bearer or something like that, and watch that child's face and body to see if they suddenly freeze a little bit, and in all likelihood they won't. And in all likelihood most of the other people will. And they will take the picture because they don't want to disappoint the bride or the groom or the family or whatever it is, and so on, or they just know that this is something they have to do. But many of those people, if you were to have asked them, would you rather not have your picture taken, and it wasn't going to hurt anyone's feelings, probably some of the people would say, yeah, I'd rather not. People say excuses in and around this, like, well, I don't like my hair, I don't like my outfit, I'm too fat, I'm too old, I'm wrinkly, I'm okay. But the truth is that if you watch for the 3 to 5 second moment wherein the wince and or flinch shows, is evidenced, what you would see is that when the people in the group anticipate the flash going off, anticipate is important. As they anticipate it, there's a certain, and it's not as bad as what I just did, but there's a certain freezing. And eyes are already anticipating being blinded, for instance. Okay. If you watch the child, and if this child has never been in a wedding and had his or her picture taken, the child won't have any anticipation of any negative thing whatsoever. They won't wince, they won't flinch, etc. Now, hopefully you have some experience of this, at least on one side of that camera, whether it is on the side of having their picture taken and the flash blinding you for a moment, or if you've been on the other side and watched people do that. Okay, it should be relatively easy for you to picture it. Unless, of course, you have that injury, in which case you'll have followed my entire story but you won't be able to picture it. And there's the telling thing right there. Now also look at what I'm telling you about the little boy, the little girl, the child who has not had that injury happen yet, and all of the rest of the people in the picture who have. The child is not wincing or flinching, and all the rest of the people, or at least most of the rest of the people, will have that anticipatory brace themselves. Okay. Especially if somebody's holding up one of those awful, blindingly white light, big kind of things, separate from the photographer. Okay. Now, already there should be two things that you should see, because if I say, can you picture, or even, let me let that go. Is there anything, any kind of an ordinary event, an ordinary thing that you hate? And certainly getting your picture taken would be one of those, and being at a wedding and getting your picture taken is common, certainly over the course of your lifetime. So now think about how I am now talking about a story wherein the child is yet to be startled. The adults, for the most part, have been startled. The child is not bracing. The adults are bracing. And now let me add something. One of the things that really is strong evidence for all of the things that we base our work on, certainly startles, is at the heart and soul of much of what we do. And so in this wedding party, I have been in that scene with getting my picture taken and so on. In that wedding party picture, let's just say that the person's holding up that big flash tree, whatever it is, with all those bulbs and, but something malfunctions and the light doesn't go off. Now just really take in what would have happened when the photographer said cheese and the light didn't go off. You see, despite the fact that the light not going off, they didn't go off, everybody who had the injury would wince or flinch or both, even though the light didn't go off. Why? Because of the 3 to 5 second pattern of that injury is what sets off the wince or flinch, and that wince or flinch is the marker for the onset of suddenly going blank, and you cannot picture. So this would be an example, hating an ordinary life event. Another one, which I'm going to tell, which is, hopefully I can do it briefly. I don't have it anymore. I would have said I would have gone to this kind of event. I have some of it left, so I could actually go, and the event is having to eat beans. Beans. Now, I know, because of work that I've done, that when I was 6 or 7 years old at my dinner table, my mother used to have a yardstick or some kind of a small board, and she would, if my sister was sitting anything less than perfect, if her arm wasn't in the right position, my mother would beat her at the dinner table. And during one or more of these times, there must have been lima beans on my plate, because I can have come to be able to picture the plate and the lima beans and staring through the plate. And so that experience of having a lima bean in my mouth and chewing it was enough for many years to make me almost throw up. I would get nauseous, and involuntarily my diaphragm would suddenly contract. Talk about flinch. Okay. So that makes sense. And I'm not saying that that's where the block marker would take me today, but that is what would have happened, say 20 years ago. Maybe 15 years ago, I was out to dinner with one of my friends, And he and I were at a sushi restaurant, a rather fancy one. And we were probably halfway through the meal, and my friend said to me, "You should have the red bean ice cream for dessert." And I can't picture it in that moment, but he told me a minute later, he said, what's the matter? And I went, "What?" The way I just said it. And he said, all I said was, "Why don't you have the red bean ice cream for dessert?" And it seemed like you got annoyed with me. Me being me, I sat with it for a minute and I saw that I had. And I said, "I'm sorry, you're right." A little while later he said it again. Brave soul or foolish or whatever, right? But at this point I had not realized that the word, what was happening to me, and I got angry at him. And he said it again, and I sat, and now I can picture myself sitting in the seat. He and I are sitting at a two-person seat against a wall. The wall is to my left. There's a white tablecloth, and I am letting the feeling go through me. Long story short, I realized it took about 6 or 7 minutes, and he was hurting. I heard him. So this was a part of me doing this right there at the table. Also, he was safe. He wasn't blaming me. He was just pointing out what was happening. And you already know a piece of this. You see, the word bean was what triggered me. And when I realized that at that dinner table, in one of those events where my mother was beating my sister and I had lima beans on my plate, she must have turned to me and said something to the effect of, "Eat your beans." And I must have shrunk inside and felt, oh God, if I don't eat these beans, she's going to beat me too. And that day when my friend said to me, "Why don't you have the red bean ice cream for dessert?" I relived my mother saying that to me and took it out on my friend. When I realized that at the table, and this took a lot of effort. I didn't want to. I wanted to make it him. I couldn't. I knew it wasn't him, but I wanted to. I didn't want to look at this. For one thing, it seemed like such an ordinary thing. Okay, so I don't want the vanilla ice cream, which I didn't realize it was vanilla. He said red bean. He didn't say vanilla. But, okay, so I don't want vanilla ice cream. Why would I get angry at him for suggesting it? Because I relived an injury. And that getting startled with my mom had turned an ordinary life event, eating beans, or being told to eat your beans, into something that caused me to have a very strong rage inside me. I wanted to hurt my friend for saying that sentence. Now, I cannot get at wanting to hurt my mother for saying that sentence to me. It is a piece of it that's unhealed. I go blank. I go empty inside. You notice I'm not giving any reasons. I'm just simply reporting what is. But the point of telling you all of this is, can you imagine a more ordinary life event? Somebody suggests that you have a dessert of a certain kind. And you want to kill them. So this is what this block marker is about. It's not about something that is extremely traumatic, although I have to say, the thing with my mom, the original event, if that's indeed the original event, obviously is traumatic. But the event we're talking about Eating ice cream at a sushi restaurant? It's not traumatic. Well, I suppose it could be, but it was not. It's an ordinary thing. They have ice cream on the menu, limited amount, but of kinds, but they have it on the menu. So ordinary life event. And I acted as if I hated that. And as I have said in a few other talks, the startle causes you to shut off inside. Like in the no decaf story, I never heard I'll make you a fresh pot. And in this story, I never realized he was suggesting I have ice cream. I couldn't hear anything after the word bean. Can you imagine how many of these we all have inside us? Hating ordinary life events. Things that we would never ever think in therapy, like to talk about to a therapist. We go, okay, so I don't like that stuff, whatever. But I'm talking about it with you because you are a person who hopefully will teach many, many, many people to look there. Because that dessert in that restaurant really was about me at 6 or 7 years old, traumatized by my mother yelling at me in the midst of her beating my sister yet again. Okay, number 3 on the list. Hating an ordinary life event. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, the third and last block marker on our list, even though there are 12, 3 is more than enough. It's already a lot of time. And it's block marker number 6, the experience of having no choice. Not sure why, but the thing that's coming up, the event that's coming up when I think about this, go to a time when I experienced no choice. In the town that I grew up in for most of my childhood, Tapan, maybe a mile and a half from the town, there's a major highway, Route 9W, and there is a bridge that goes from 2 high points. In between that is the town of Piermont, and there's this bridge, and it's probably at least 80, maybe 90 feet above the ground, maybe as much as 100 feet above the road. And it is a steel girder bridge. It's not a suspension bridge, it's a steel girder bridge. And there are steel girders, and underneath the road are these crisscrosses of steel reinforcement. So if you can imagine, here's the road, and then there's steel girders on the side, big ones. And then underneath there's a web of these steel crisscrosses, a number of them, under the whole road. And that section of road is probably maybe 250 feet long. Okay, so in my town, I'm about 15, I think, and in my town there were 2 bullies. There were not a lot of people, not a lot of kids to hang out with, and there were 2 bullies, and one of the worst of the 2 bullies, I was afraid of both of them. And there were a number of 3 or 4 other boys that also hung out with this group of kids. And as I think about it now, I'm welling up a little bit because it probably felt a lot like what it felt like at home. I was afraid all the time at home, and I was afraid every time I was with these people. Anyway, on this particular day, we have walked down to that Spark Hill Bridge, and the bigger of the bullies has told us we will climb up the I don't know, the girders, the big steel girders that support the bridge. We're going to climb up across all those crisscrossed reinforcements, and we are going to walk on the girdering that's underneath the road, which is about 6 inches wide, maybe 8 inches wide. And we're going to walk on that. We're going to crawl on that underneath the road, 80 or 90 feet in the air. Now, I am already have two different kinds of injuries about the fear of heights in play that day. And there's no way I wanted to go up on that bridge. There was no way. But I felt like I had no choice. And I don't mean I logically felt no choice. I felt like if I didn't go, I knew I was going to get beaten. And you know, I have a intimate relationship in my earlier years with watching people get beaten. So we all, I think there were the two bullies and myself and maybe three other boys, they make us go up first. And we are going up that thing, and maybe now we're 90 feet in the air, you know, maybe 8 feet below the surface of the road, and now we're told, go out and start climbing across those girders. I think somebody went before me, but I started crawling out. And again, my heart's pounding out of my chest. I'm not sure that I was ever that afraid. And part of the way that I can tell is that when I was out about 15 feet away from the support girder, I said, fuck you, quietly. And I started to get a path to crawl back. Desperately moving inch by inch, my heart pounding. And I reached the girder and I climbed to the bottom. Now, I cannot picture going down. I can picture being on the ground and waiting to get a beating, which didn't come, very similar to the way it didn't come for me often when I was early childhood. So if I felt that I had a choice, I would have gone, no, I'm not going up there. And if the guy went at me, I at least, very least, could have run away. And scared kids run quickly. And we were all about the same age. That particular bully was taller than me by maybe a head. But, you know, there were no choices. I experienced nothing. I could see nothing. I was simply being told, and I had to do this. And I didn't think in my head I had to do it. I had that kind of empty, blank, resigned to my death feeling, and I start climbing up this support tower and start climbing out in the girders underneath the bridge. Can you imagine being, you know, 80 or 90 feet in the air and you're on a little thing maybe 8 inches wide of metal and there's nothing to hang on to on the sides? You're knee in front of knee and holding on for dear life and like a centipede or something? I can picture snatches of the girder as I tell you. I can see that the color is green. I can see that there's some paint chipped off and it's rusted. I have a vague sense of other kids on other beams, just as terrified as I am. In one of those rare times in my life, as a 2, I didn't have any feelings of giving a shit about what happened to them. It wasn't that I was selfish. I had no room for anything else in my mind. I was terrified. And I had that kind of self-centeredness that a terrified person has. Not selfishness, self-centeredness. Oh my God, this is going to happen to me. I can't tell you how many times I've sat with people who felt they had no choice. Relationships where one person is violent and the other one, they have no choice but to take a beating from, say, a violent husband, and it's the wife. I've had that type of a thing come to my office many times. The point, though, is I am simply saying that here we have another block marker, a simple question that marks where a person is likely blocked. Because you ask it, they go to some time, and then you have some things you can watch for. You can ask questions like, can you picture that? And perhaps a part of it, like I can vividly picture the bridge at the bottom, and there's a stream, right by that road. The road winds by a stream, and the stream goes under the bridge, and I can vividly picture that. I cannot picture going up the tower. When I told you about it, I went blank. I can picture being out on the beam. I can't picture having crawled out to that spot. I can vaguely sense a shadowy figure of two other boys that are on the bottom of that bridge. And I have this intense feeling as I decide I'm going down. And then after I say that, I'm blank. Until I get to the ground, and I can now picture, this is after I begin to picture, it's after the startle, and it's after the blankness, and I can picture myself at the bottom waiting for the other boys to come down. And I have this clear memory of it taking quite a while. I can remember walking away that day with the group and nobody said anything. I think we all knew something very wrong had happened. But the point of telling you again is not the story. It's for you to see the pieces. What could I picture? What could I not picture? When I looked at this block marker, this was the first story that came to mind. The experience of having no choice, which I had many times in my childhood. So anyway, this is the last of this section of undoubtedly long descriptions. But please realize how valuable this little list is of 12 things. If you can just simply ask one of these questions. Can you vividly recall a painful event? Have you ever had a time where you felt you had no choice? Is there anything ordinary, like a food or something like that you hate? These things are very useful when you're trying to help change a life. And once again, I'm so glad you're here. I surely am.